My come was like really maybe. Okay, well, without further ado, we will talk about automating your Crud. First of all, I don't know if everyone's heard of the term Crud before, but this is what it stands for. Create, read, update, delete. Those are your common database functions. Usually, you can think of them as data entry screens. They're just the screens to get the data into whatever your application is to actually use it in some useful way. If you develop for clients a lot, like I used to do, the stuff gets to really be a pain. How many people here enjoy writing CRUD screens? Anyone? Okay. I was right. Not many. Just because it's usually the same sort of thing over and over again, very repetitive, not very challenging or interesting, which is usually the type of stuff that programmers like to do. Interesting and challenging stuff. So my motivation for writing the CRUD screen generator that I'm going to be showing you guys tonight, made a book review website for my wife, created the bare minimum interface, again, because this was my wife, not a client, so I could cheat a little bit. And then basically anytime there was anything that she couldn't do through the interface, I'd have to go into the database and do. And yeah, after a while, I got sick of doing that. So I was like, this is stupid. Why do I write these screens over and over again when they're all almost the same? They do the same basic things. This should be a task I can automate. So my original goal was I wanted to write like an 90% solution to generate screens for me, and then I could tweak them by hand from there. But I got a little carried away. So I actually ended up with what at this point I think is pretty much 100% solution. I haven't found anywhere where it has either failed me or I can't easily modify the program to get it to do what I want it to do. So I just wrote up a little demo, and I literally just whipped this up over last weekend. There was not much to it, so I figure I'll start by showing you what it looks like, and then we'll go into how it all gets built up to this point. So basically, it's just a movie cataloger database. Believe it or not, this is actually the start of a real application that I'm going to develop and use for myself. So I figured, hey, I'll get, twice the bang for my buck. I'll get a presentation out of it while it's very simple, and then I'll build off of it from here. So basically, you've got, this again, really basic. This is not a real application by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to keep it simple so that I could actually cover it all in an hour. So you've got a title field, you've got a synopsis field, you've got media types, whatever type of media, God forbid VHS, we actually still have some of that we're trying to get rid of. You've got all your different MPAA ratings, and then you've got another table, which you see over here. You've got actor administration that you can go in and modify that, and I'll show you some of those other screens. So you can go in and pick and control click, select multiple actors, all that good stuff. So at this point, we'll go ahead and just add one. And this is where it all blows up horribly because I'm doing it in front of people, right? So we're just going to steal this, and please ignore whatever interference we've got going on here. I have no idea what the deal is, but okay. All right, and we'll say we have this on Blu-ray. I'm pretty sure, was that PG-13? Pretty sure when I looked it up it was PG-13. Oh well, it is now for the sake of this. So we can go through it. Surely Kevin Bacon was in it. Sorry, I had to throw Kevin Bacon in here. Now, so we will look for, we've got Lawrence Fishburne, we've got Carrie-Anne Moss, Keanu Reeves, whoops, Hugo Weaving, and I think that's most the people. Oh, yeah. All right, and then you hit add. You notice here I've got required fields. That's kind of important. I just want to point it out now because you'll see where that comes from later. So add movie, and you just get a nice little message up here, movie added. Nothing too fancy. Okay, if we want to modify a movie, we can search. If I leave it blank, by default, it will pull up every movie I've got in there. I'd already put in Fellowship of the Rings. You probably recognize most of the cast off of the other actors in there. So, again, you know, it just comes up with, oh my gosh, Kevin Bacon. Yeah. So, I did that on purpose so that I could go in here and actually show you that you can fix this. Billy Boyd, Ian Holm, Christopher Lee, Ian McKellen, Dominic, Vigo, John, Andy Serkis, Liv Tyler, Hugo Weaving, Elijah Wood. Modify movie. There you go. So you can see that it kept the state. I could have changed any of the other fields I wanted to if I wanted. So I'll just show you a couple of, I'm not going to bother even going into the delete screens. They're not really that interesting. It basically gives you a drop down of records you can pick to delete. But for the sake of time, I'm going to skip that. Okay. Modify media type. So again, if you just hit search, it'll give you everything that's here. If we do something like this, it'll just, you know, basically it's just doing a percent whatever percent query in your database. So if you put in any kind of a partial, it'll give you whatever's there. And then if you click on it, it just gives you a text field so you can change it. And if you change it, it, you know, trust me that it shows up differently in all the other ones. So let's see. The actor one's a little bit more interesting. So add actor, because you've got a couple of different fields. So I cheated here, just said first and middle, so that I didn't have to have a separate middle one, and last name. So took a little shortcut there. Modify actor. This one actually is a little more interesting because you can see how it's a little more useful that way. There gives us both of our Ians from Lord of the Rings. So any questions so far? I want to make sure I'm not going too fast. I just have a lot of ground to cover. Pretty straightforward stuff, right? Not anything too complicated. Basically, I wanted something that, you know, a non-technical user like my wife could use, and it's intuitive, and, you know, they can figure out how to add their own records, modify their stuff, delete their stuff, and best of all, not bother me about it. Just basically they can take care of it. So that's what I wanted. And I wanted to not have to build it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the workflow and tools that basically I use to develop this. Not all of this is critical to this talk, and not everybody would agree with doing this or like doing it this way. This just happens to be a way that I've discovered over the years that works pretty well for me. I start with Dia. Anybody familiar with Dia at all? Basically, it's a very lightweight Visio. It's nowhere as close to Visio as the GIMP is to Photoshop. It's quite a bit. So I even hesitate to compare it to Visio, but you get the idea of the type of thing that it is. If you want more information, you can go to their website, and you get the idea. It's a diagram creation program. So this is the schema that I created. As you'll probably notice, it looks pretty familiar based off of the screens we saw. We've got our MPAA rating, our media type, our actor, and since we've got a multi-to-multi relationship between movie and actor, because I happened to pick those two movies just because it had Hugo Weaving between the two movies. So, I just wanted one that was actually in both. I actually thought about going crazy for a while, and since I had Kevin Bacon in there, but I didn't have enough time, so I just kept it simple. So basically, does this look pretty intuitive to everybody? Not any questions about this, how it works? Basically, you've got your relationships, your one-to-many relationships and your many-to-many relationships, and it's pretty basic. This is kind of cheating because this is actually UML diagrams, but it's close enough to database stuff that people have just more or less hijacked this to use it for database schemas. So then there used to be just a standalone script that the Dia's file format is just a zipped XML file. So it's all text, all easily parsable. There used to be a standalone script that somebody had written that would take that and generate all the SQL statements you needed to create that schema for several different databases. Well, I just found out when I sat down to write this that the new version of Dia is no longer compatible with that script anymore. And if you go to that website, it actually points you to this module. So now somebody took it and actually put it on CPAN modularized it. And best of all, it actually works with the latest Dia file format, and it's backwards compatible with the older formats as well. So that's... again, this is just your normal search CPAN documents. So what's nice, though, is it does point you back to the script that it was based off of, because that website's still useful because it has a lot of useful examples. And since this is compatible enough with the old one, it tends to help you quite a bit. So, again, this is kind of tangential to the actual talking about Crud, but I just like doing it this way because I get, I can maintain this in a diagram, then generate the schema from the diagram. So if I want to go and make a change, like to my wife's website, add a new table, I just go to the diagram, I add a new table, generate the SQL from there. One thing that I actually did to this, and I will probably send it to the author, I don't know whether or not he'll use it, but it's actually in his to-do file, is that the old script used to allow you to do auto-increment fields for MySQL. This parse Dia SQL does not. Well, except my version. My version actually does, because I needed that, so... I patched that in there. So, okay, then the database portion of it is just load in the SQL. I mean, I'm sure everybody that's ever worked with the database has done that sort of thing. It's just load the SQL into the database. Doesn't really matter what kind of database it is, just load it in. In my case, I just happen to be using MySQL. So the last step is to use the Crud program to generate the screens. This is based off the actual database schema. It actually logs into the database, pulls the schema out, and then generates the screens from the schema. It also, theoretically, I could make it work with SQL files from the actual files and skip the database step, but I haven't bothered to do that because I need the database anyways, so, why not? Any questions about that so far? Okay. All right. Now I'm going to get towards the meat of the talk here, how it actually works. Basically, I'm going to illustrate that by showing you a couple of templates. This is the add form template, and I will make that. Is that readable by you guys back there? Okay. All right. So basically, add, and then it's got a tag, title. Some of you guys have probably seen, I have my own templating system that I've used. You've probably seen it from other talks. If you saw me talk about my wiki, you've seen some of this stuff before, so I won't beat it to death. Basically, it's a tag that gets replaced by movie or actor or, whatever the name of the actual table is. Just normal HTML stuff. This is the TinyMCE. That's the HTML editor that was built in. So that's just pulls in an include file for that. Not too much interesting there. Let's see. There's where our left navigation comes in. And I did do this in a table. I know Tom might beat me up in the parking lot after the talk, but for me, actually, this is kind of tabular. I mean, the forms are kind of tabular. Probably should be divs, but what are you going to do? I was in a hurry. So anyways, you notice that, we've got a variable for the action where it's going to post to, because for every table, it's going to post to a different place, right? Because it needs to handle the fields differently, because each table has different fields, different validations that may be run against the data that's being entered into the database, that sort of thing. So you'll see more of that later, because I'll actually show you this once it gets generated. This is just where you get the error or the message. You remember when I didn't show you an error, actually. I should, I'll go back just to show you an error real quick. I'll leave it open this time. If I just come down here and just say add movie, that's the kind of thing you get for error. It says, hey, you didn't do this right. If you're doing different types of validations, you can have different kind of errors. But these are just basic validations. Was there data there or not? That's all I'm doing here. Nothing too fancy. So that's what all of this nonsense is about. You notice that this is an array and it does a join, because you may have multiple errors, as you just saw. So that's what all that's about. That's our required field. And then the next thing we got is a tag for the form body. And that's it. That's pretty much all there is to it. I also customized the button. Again, add movie, add actor, add whatever the table name is. Gets shown in that. Okay, so that was, let me go back to where I was. All right. This is the page that it posts to. So you can tell here, there's really not much to it. You've got validation that gets put in here. You get formatting if you want to do any special formatting before it gets inserted into the database. and then you get your add SQL, which actually puts it into the database. So far, so good? Does that make sense? So basically, I start with these templates, and I could customize these for every project, have a different set of templates for each project, different styles. I could actually use divs instead of tables. I could do, basically whatever I want. You create the templates the way you want your screens to end up looking in the end. It's a very iterative process as you create the templates. You generate them, you look at them, you tweak them a little bit. If it doesn't look right, you make your changes, try again. Okay. So now the Crud file takes these templates, and you've got, I just showed you a couple. There's modify, there's delete, there's search for, you remember the searches when you do searches for deletes or modifies? So there's a whole slew of templates that you need for this. So what it does is it scans the schema, and then it's got some heuristics in there. Basically, it guesses at what a reasonable thing is to do with the schema that it's got in front of it. Because my goal was, again, you remember, the original goal was an 80%, 90% solution. I just wanted it to get me close, and then I figured I'd tweak the rest by hand. Well, what instead I've done is I get 80, 90% of the way there, and then I've got a config file that overrides. If you don't like what it did automatically with the stuff, you get to override it in the config file, and I'll show you that in a little bit. It'll make a little bit more sense. Okay, what actually does most of the magic, as usual, is CPAN. SQL Translator, also known as SQL Fairy. They have a website. They actually have T-shirts. Oops. There you go. They've got T-shirts. So basically what it does is it just creates objects, virtual tables in memory, that represent your schema. So you've got a bunch of objects that are connected to each other based on your relationships in your database schema that you can then use. What's nice about it is basically it's got input stuff, so it can input from different sources. It's got your intermediate object state, and then it's got a bunch of generators, or you can make your own generators on the back end. So you could do stuff like with this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the dot format for generating actual diagrams, but I forget what it's called now. It's the program that uses the dot format. But anyways, basically you could use that to read your schema and then generate a diagram the other way. Instead of generating your database from the diagram, you can generate a diagram from your database if you want to do it. So basically anything you can think of that you want to do with the schema, you can output it to something else. If you want to write, let's say, a database neutral XML interchange format for schemas between databases, you could write that. It could take your schema, write it out as XML, and then you could have another program that reads in that XML and generates a schema for a completely different database. Just examples off the top of my head. Whatever you can think of.
Doxygen?
No. But I wish, oh man, it's going to drive me nuts all night. Sorry. Maybe I'll look it up at the end. But anyway. So these are the actual generated pages. Again, the same two from these templates. This is what you get out of it. Okay, again, we've got an include here because this actually gets parsed and included at runtime. So that tag didn't get replaced. So some of the tags get replaced, some of them didn't. You notice this one did. It says movie here now. You notice here, this is all of our left nav. We've got our error stuff just like we did before. Let's see, text area. Yeah, see now, you'll see my text area here, which is for my synopsis, my field for my title, so this is where it actually now put the stuff that you need for the actual form in there now. Before it was one tag, now it's like a whole bunch of stuff. So this is where you pick your media type, select media type, and I've got a little SQL that actually gets, again, run at runtime to pull that in. Same with the rating, and then that's basically it for that. We'll look at, hold on, maybe I shouldn't have gone so fast. Everybody clear on what just happened there? We had some tags in the templates that got replaced with a whole bunch of stuff, basically fields from the database. And again, going back to the heuristics, it looks at things like, what type of field is this? If it's a varchar field, it looks at how long is it, and it gives you a field that's that long. If it's a text field, which, as you might imagine, the synopsis was, it gives you a text area. So you can basically put your HTML editor in there or leave it out if it's just text. So it actually looks at the database to get hints about what type of form it should give you. But again, all of this is overridable, so if you don't like what it picked, you can change that. So is everybody clear with that so far? All right. Now we'll look at this is the page that actually does it. You're not going to see any HTML here because all of this, what this does is process all the data, and then it redirects you back to the form with the message that it succeeded or all those errors if it failed for some reason. So here's my validation. You notice these are my different fields, and these are my error messages if it didn't succeed for some reason. So this is where it actually validates to see whether or not data was passed for those fields. And then if I redirect back to the add movie form, if there are any errors, basically, if any of those failed, boom, we immediately just redirect them back to the form with everything still populated. So they don't lose any of the stuff that they did populate, but there may have been one that they didn't populate, so they got to go back and populate that one. All right, one other thing that I put in here that's a little fancy, this falls under the filtering, is you notice earlier when I put in the matrix, what this does is takes and actually puts that at the end, comma, space, the, A-N or the, because otherwise you can't use SQL sorts properly to properly sort everything. So basically, I filter it for you. You can either type it the right way, and this I actually wrote especially for my wife, because she'd always forget. I told her, you have to put comma, blah, blah at the end. And every single time she'd do it wrong the first time, then at least she had the ability to go back and fix it. But again, why should the user do that? So I wrote a little function that does it for you. If you do it wrong, it just does a little regular expression and puts it at the end for you. And then basically on the front end, when you redisplay it, you get to pick. I've got another function which does the opposite to put it back up front if you want. Or if it's in a list, like you saw earlier when I was searching, you actually want to leave it that way. So you either leave it or you put it back the way you wanted it, or, with the AN or the in front. So you've got a little filtering going on, so you can do some cool stuff with that. Then you've got an insert, which, nothing too exciting there. Just inserts the data from the values that you passed. And then you've got a loop here for the insert on the many-to-many, because for the actors, you may have selected many actors, so it's got to loop through all of those and create the relationships between those two tables. And if you've gotten this far and nothing's gone wrong, then you get your message, movie added. What to do? just redirects you back to the form. I only include the movie message because if I didn't only include that, you'd get a pre-populated form again, which actually I'm figuring at this point you want to add another one. So I'm just taking you back to the screen, blanking it out, giving you a success message, and that's it. You're ready to go with a blank form to enter more data. So far, so good? Makes sense? And again, I mean, the reason I wrote this was because I wrote these stinking screens by hand over and over again, basically the same way every single time. I mean, so I was like, I gotta automate this. This is just crazy because it's just, they're so close to each other every single time, no matter what it is I'm trying to do. They're very close to each other. So I just have to build in a little flexibility into it, which we'll get into shortly. Okay, so we've talked about all of that. Now, here is where I'm going to get into the actual flexibility and how you'll get to see the heuristics as you build it up. So, what you can do, this is the config file. Some people may beat me up in the parking lot for using XML as my format, but it just happened to work at the time, and it turned out to work fairly well. So for this application, I don't necessarily recommend XML for everything, but for this particular application, it worked out. But I know some people hate XML. But basically, okay, you've got an opening CRUD, you've got your DSN, you got your database name. This is just basically the basic information, my top secret password. Thought I'd throw that out there. This is the basic information you need for the program to be able to connect to MySQL and grab the schema out. So you need at least this much stuff. Depending on your database, it may vary a little bit exactly how it's formatted, but you at least need the connection information so that it can access the schema. So I added in a couple of other things, though, that were basically, I allow you to have the ability to set things at a global level or at a table or field level. These, I just decided I wanted, all my text areas to be this size, regardless. So I put it at a very high level here. And I set a max size of 40 on my text fields, because you remember earlier I said if it's a varchar, it may be 255. Do you really want, a text input of 255 characters? Probably not, because from a user interface standpoint, it's not going to work out too well because it'll scroll. So
what wins? Is it the global that wins or the local?
The local will override the global. So basically, I just said arbitrarily, I don't want it any larger than 40. So it will still take 255 characters. It'll just start scrolling within the text box. It just won't give you a text input field that's 255 characters long. I didn't want that. So
That's nicer size that does that.
This has no bearing to actual HTML. Sorry for the confusion. This is just what I called it. So this is config language, not HTML. So, yes. No, I mean, you'll see a few things. I can see how it can be confusing because obviously text areas and HTML tag, but the way I'm using it, it's config language, not HTML language. And where it is, it's mostly because it makes sense or coincidental. So either way. Okay, so this is pretty much the most basic config file you can have. The only way to make it more basic would be to leave these two things out. So now what we're going to do, again, oh my gosh, I'm doing this live. This is on my server. Hopefully I haven't lost my connection. Oh, I haven't. Good. Okay, you notice I'm running it with demo 1. So we hit enter. Okay, it's done. It's generated our screens. Now, let's go back to our page. Okay, remember how this looks? Just take a look at it for a second because it's about to change. So I want you to notice the difference. Actually, I'll just go back to the add movie here. So I'll get rid of my errors. Okay. Now, you may have noticed this all changed over here. This stuff changed over here. Because what did it do? One of the heuristics was, well, I'm going to put it in alphabetical order because I don't know what order you want it in. You know, so it just says, okay, I put the tables in alphabetical order. You notice all of these names, these table names here, if I have an underscore in there, I turn it into a space. I uppercase each letter. So this is actually coming from the database. I'm not configuring that anywhere. It's just the table, if we look at the schema, the table was named media underscore type. And so it just takes that name, and as it turns out, it does a pretty good job just by guessing of giving you something that's, you know, reasonable approximation of what you want. Here, however, is not a great approximation of what we want. MPAA is, you know, an abbreviation. So we really want all those to be capitalized, right? Look much better if it was. And again, you notice the fields. We've got the same fields. They're just in a different order. And I preferred to rearrange them into an order that made more sense to me, you know, by putting title at the top, that sort of thing. So, and you'll also notice we only have the first name of the actors here, because when it generates this, you may have many fields in your table that you're joining to. It doesn't know which one to pick, so it picks the first one. Again, you know, reasonable. If it wasn't a last name, first name, if for instance you just had one name field, this may do exactly what you want. Or in, you know, other cases where you've got like categories or something, you may just have an ID field and a category name field, and that's it. So it'll do the right thing under those circumstances. Here you see, though, it didn't. And again, this is deliberate so that I can show you how you can progress. Okay, so let's look at the next level. Okay, again, we're going to skip over all this junk. We've seen it all before. This is all the same. Now, we've got a tag called navigation order. Now, the deal with this, though, is once you decide you're going to take control with like something like navigation order, you have to specify everything. If you leave the tag out, that won't show up in your navigation, because it basically, I didn't make it smart enough to figure out, oh, partially alphabetize this and partially put it in order, because I couldn't even figure out a way to do that and make it make sense. So basically, although that can be an advantage, because there may be something you don't want in your navigation. If you don't want it in your navigation, all you got to do is leave the tag out here. It won't show up. So you notice now I rearrange things. Movie is, you know, our main table, then media type, then the rating. And you notice here, what did I do? Table label, because I didn't like the fact that this wasn't all uppercase. Well, now I'm overriding that. And here I'm making it all uppercase. So for the rest of these, you notice I'm not putting any parameters in here. I'm just putting the tags in here to tell it which order to put them in the navigation. So that's about it. I haven't really done much else here. So again, we're going to do scary live generation of stuff and hope that it works. And then we're going to go back to our add movie. Watch over here. Okay, see, you notice the order changed. You notice over here, though, none of this stuff changed, because we didn't do anything to that stuff yet. So again, that's why I call this an iterative process. You basically, you go through, I just, you know, have it generate it, by default, first, see how close I am. And then I decide which parts I like and which parts I don't like, and then I go and add them to the config file. And you can see, since it only takes mere seconds to regenerate the screens, you know, you could just sit there and, you know, over a matter of 10-15 minutes, whip this out into a really nice format without too much work. So what we will look at next is the final formatter. Okay, we got our navigation order. Remember all that. Now we're down into form body. Inside of form body, you can have a tag for each different table. Now form body, again, is for the form pages, right? Any page where you're doing the actual input. So you can have for each different table different specifications. This is where I've got, you remember that piece of filter code? This right here generates that for you. So you put in a condition that you want it to be executed, and you get and put in what you want it to actually be executed when that condition is met, and that's what it does for you. So you notice synopsis, again, similar to the order of the navigation. Once you start tweaking fields in here, you have to at least specify all of them so that it knows what order to put them in. Synopsis I'm not doing anything with, so I just put it in here like this. Media type ID, again, not doing anything with that. Again, my field label. So this one I put a few things in here. The other thing I did, and this is actually a feature I added for this talk, because I realized before the only order you would get is by whichever field was being returned. Well, in this case, I didn't want alphabetical order, right? I wanted to put them in my database in a certain order and then have them sorted by ID. So that's why I did it that way, because sometimes alphabetic order makes a lot of sense a lot of times, but sometimes it doesn't. So here you go. Now you've got a way to override that and tell it, oh, I want to sort off of a different field. Now, you remember our problem with the actors only having the first name. Here's where we solve this. Again, this is just a fragment of SQL that gets inserted in there. I'm doing a concat of last name, comma, first name, calling the field name, and then saying down here, display the field name instead of last name or, you know, first middle name. So you give it a different name, you tell it that's what I want displayed, and that's what it shows up with. Only thing I've done to the MPAA rating form is, again, change the label. Here I did the same thing, because you remember how I said the name of this table was, or field was first underscore middle underscore name. Well, I didn't want that. I wanted to actually put an and in there. So it's not smart enough to do that by itself. So I override that with a label here. And here again, I'm not doing anything too fancy, except this right here is the search form body. So you remember those search pages. This one, you specify which fields you want to show up, because like for the movie field, you don't want all the fields searchable necessarily. You don't want to search by synopsis, most likely. Maybe you do, I don't know. But in this case, I didn't. I just wanted to search by title. So that's the only field I put in here is title. So when it gives you a search form, it only allows you to search off of title. And again, for the actor drop down that you get, or I'm sorry, the actually list of the search results that you get, again, I wanted to do last name, comma, first name. So that's where this gets done here. Okay, so now we'll do our live run again of this with the third one. And we're done, and I have mail. now, there you go. You see everything. This is how we originally started, with everything in the right places, things labeled the way I want them to be labeled, things in the right order. You notice last name, comma, first name, again, because before the default didn't make much sense. But this may seem like a lot, and I know I'm going through it pretty fast, but I'm trying to keep it down to an hour. But compared to the amount of work, when I actually do this and generate these screens, how many screens you end up with? Actually, rather than guess, I can just, on the server, so I'll just go back and look. Oh no, let's do this. CD, okay, CD templates, admin. Oh, minus the dot file. Sorry, I'm still editing this stuff at home. But minus the swap files, you can see, look at how many files I did. I used to do all these things by hand. All of these are now generated automatically for me. And literally, Tom can vouch for this, that basically I did this over this weekend in a matter, the talk and the database schema, the screens, everything, over a matter of maybe 4 or 5 hours. It used to take me probably about an hour per screen for all those screens to do it by hand. Now I can do the whole thing in just, a few hours, tweak it, make it fancy. Oh, well, and I'm forgetting, I also added features to the program too while I was doing it, because I decided that, I forgot I added something else too, but I know I added that order by so that you could change what you wanted it to be ordered by. That's what I like about the program too, is that it's easy to add new stuff to the configuration to override the stuff you don't want. Because that literally took me, to add that feature, like 15 minutes, testing included. So now we'll finally get to the actual program. And I'm not going to go through all of it because it's a little long. I'm just going to go through and point out some interesting parts. This lingua inflect allows me to get plurals when it makes sense. So that's a little bit of the heuristic cheating I was talking about. That's how it's able to generate automatically plurals off of singular named tables and things like that automatically. So that's a CPAN module. That's actually Damien Conway, I think, did that one. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Memoize. I'll mention it. Basically, what Memoize does is takes a function and basically creates a cache for it, so that if it ever sees the same inputs again, it will just output the same output that it gave out before. So in other words, it only has to execute actually once with a given set of parameters, and from then on out it just remembers the answer and spits that out. The reason I did that, well, actually it's not necessarily necessary, because you see how fast it generates the screens, but just because the navigation is the same on every stinking page, so why should I recalculate that every single time? So it gets calculated on the very first page, and then from then on out it just dumps out the HTML that got generated. This is just basically my usage. So you've got a config file, you specify an output directory where you want it to go, and a template directory where it reads all those templates in. Yeah, that's bug checking. Oh yeah, I did skip something here. This xconfig, I couldn't find anything actually that would parse my config files the way I wanted. I tried XML simple, And I got in a nice endless loop because I'd find one parameter that would fix one thing and it would break something else. And then I'd try another parameter, and it just, I mean, XML simple, don't get me wrong, is great for a lot of things. But in this particular circumstance, I couldn't get it to do exactly what I wanted to do, so I ended up writing my own. I decided, for time's sake, I'll probably just leave this for another whole talk, and I'll talk about this module as a whole separate talk. So this is where we connect. Anywhere you see this config, that's basically our parsed HTML. It gets parsed into basically just a multi-dimensional hash is basically what all that XML gets parsed into. So it's just levels and levels and levels of hashes. So that's where my database name, you remember all that stuff, DSN, all that stuff in the XML, that's where it came from. Okay, so we create our SQL translator object. We tell it what kind of parser we want to use. We give it the database handle that we just took care of up there. And any kind of arguments that we want to pass to the parser, I wanted to use this later, so I passed it on to the parser. So this is the main guts of it. It says, okay, here's my parser that I want, or it dies. Then I want to parse the SQL, again, the schema, or die. And then I want to call a producer, which the producer is the thing that I created. This is the back end thing I said where you could do anything you want with it. A lot of people do use SQL translator. In fact, that's where the name came from, just to convert schemas from one database to another. You know, if you want to migrate from MySQL to Sybase or whatever, this can help you do that and translate all the different funky uniqueness that each little database has over when you output the schema. So I don't know how well it does that job. I've never actually used it for that purpose, but I know a lot of people do. And in fact, that's probably one of the primary things it's used for. Okay, and then the last thing is translate, which does the actual execution of everything. That's it. That's the main part of the program. The rest of it is just details. And there are a lot of details. Okay, so here's my produce. This is what it calls when it actually runs the producer. So I get a translator object. Here's my schema. I have simple things like get tables. That does what the obvious thing. It gives you all the names of the tables that are in your schema. So I loop through those. I really don't like the name of this method, but I'm kind of stuck with it. Trivial link table, that's the table where you've got the two IDs where you're doing a many-to-many relationship. That's what he called it. I would have preferred like junction table or something like that, but anyways, that's what he called it, was trivial link. So basically, I'm only looking for trivial link tables. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm pulling a little trick here, and this is the trick that makes most of the magic work. Is the fundamental problem, the mismatch between a schema and screens are sometimes you want fields on a screen that are actually in a different table, right? You want actors. Well, actors are not in the movie table, they're in the actors table. You want ratings. You want media types. Those are all in different tables, but yet you want them all on that screen. So what I do, I'm not going to go through all the details of it because we're actually going to go over time, but we got started a little late, is basically I go through and I create virtual fields inside the table. I reach out, look across the relationships and go, oh, I've got a relationship with the actors table. It's a many-to-many relationship. So I'm going to generate a field in the movie table, even though it doesn't actually belong there. But I'm doing this up front because it saves me a whole lot of work when I dump this stuff out. So basically up front, I figure out all my relationships, grab all the fields I need from all the different tables, stuff them all into the main table that I'm generating currently. And again, remember, we're looping through all the tables. So any table that's got relationships, it'll do this for. And you see like foreign key reference, blah, blah, blah. That's where it goes off and does its magic and figures this all out. And I call these virtual fields because they're not real fields in the actual database. They just exist in my objects. So then I call generate crud, and I return 1 to tell everything else that, hey, I succeeded. And the rest of this is where I add the virtual fields. I'm going to mostly gloss over those details. Here's my generate crud. Look at this nice little thing. You may recognize some of these. These are my tag names. When it sees those tags, this is what it does over here. Different things. When it sees title, all it does is take title, just as a scalar. When it sees left navigation, it actually calls a function, passes in the schema parameter. So depending on what it is I'm doing, this is how I figure out which form to post to in my form tags. I just generate a screen and I keep all the names very consistent so that it can auto-generate them all. That's basically it. And then from here on out, it's, let's see, skip hidden files. Yeah, that's just so it doesn't pick up garbage like my VI files that are left around. Okay, I don't think there's anything too important there. There's where I get my table label. And you remember what I said about underscores becoming spaces, and then I capitalize stuff. This is where that happens. By default, it'll do that. Here's where I generate my left navigation. And you notice here, if I have navigation order defined in my config, I use it. Otherwise, I just say get tables, and it gives them to me in alphabetical order. And that's how I get either the automatic stuff or the override stuff. So the form body, you've got a bunch of different field types. Is primary key. You remember earlier when I said it was kind of important to notice, well actually no, not with is primary key, but basically it looks, for required fields, it looks to see whether or not the field is nullable. Because if it's a not null field, then by default it's going to make it a required field, right? Because you want to put something in it. But you can override that if you don't like that. But in most cases, I found that's the behavior I want, is that if it's a not null field, I actually want the user to put something in. So that here is where it goes through a tree to figure out what type of input field you need. Do you need a text area? Do you need a text field? Do you need a drop down? Do you need a multi-select drop down? That's basically what this is. Many to one, it figures that out, and it says build a drop down. You remember you saw a couple of those drop down. Here's the text area, if it's the data type is text. So this is just basically the whole tree where it goes through and figures out what kind of field am I dealing with and what kind of input do I generate for that. And then the rest of this, I'm not going to go through because the rest of this is the details of actually generating all those fields and the validation that goes along with it and the SQL that goes along with it and all that stuff. Unless anybody's got any specific questions, I'll just show you. Here's one of the longer configs. See, it's trying to figure out whether or not it's required. So it says tag name, which would be the tag of the input field, which table, field, and whether or not it's required. You know, that's where it you can override that. You see where is nullable. That's the stuff I was just talking about. So otherwise, since I'm already over time here, I'm going to stop and open the floor to any specific questions or general questions.
So on that, when you can actually make it required,
yeah.
How do you do that in the config?
In the config?
Like actually, yeah, the actual.
Basically, I would just create a tag that says required with a slash.
For required?
Yeah, it looks for a tag called required. That's why I just generated this into something. Basically, wherever you see a name here, that directly matches the name of the XML tag that you would use in the config file. That's one thing I need to do is actually document the config format, file format, because right now it's all up here or I read the code. So I need to actually document that. But this is still somewhat in its infancy, but I use it on my wife's site all the time. It works great. I used it to create this in, you know, a matter of hours, and you can see how you can just iteratively tweak it and make changes pretty quick and do it much faster than doing it by hand. Now obviously there are other ways you could go about doing this. A lot of people generate CRUD screens that are completely dynamic and may give you some kind of like grid interface that just, you know, like you're editing the table directly. You know, it depends on what you want. I just wanted something that was easy for non-technical users, so that's why I went with this approach. I also did a static generation just because, despite the fact that it runs pretty fast now, I used to have this on a much slower server, and parsing the schema is actually pretty slow. So doing that at runtime would cause those screen load times to just be terrible. Probably on this server it might be decent, but definitely on my old server it would have been horrible. So that's why I decided to go the static route. Plus I can check them into version control and stuff like that when I generate them. So, all right. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Thanks for coming, guys. I appreciate it. I hope you caught most of it. I know some of that was pretty fast because this was a pretty large thing to try to cram into 1 hour, but hopefully most of it made sense. Some of the downsides, obviously this is very tailored towards the way I work and towards my templating system. Not very modular. So obviously if I wanted to put something like this out into the wild, I would probably make it a lot more pluggable so you could use different templating systems and, you know, all that stuff. But quite frankly, I have a life and I don't have time for that sort of thing. So I just wrote it to do what I wanted it to do. So that was pretty much it. So, okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming out, guys. I appreciate it.